Welcome to Running Up the Score. I am Alex Kennedy. This is my new show that airs every Tuesday and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. We talk all things NBA, NFL, all sports. Today we have a special guest joining me. Kevin Garnett's Big Ticket Sports is launching a new 3-on-3 basketball league called Str33t. They're launching it in conjunction with Pro League Network. And we're joined today by Big Ticket Sports CEO, George Daniel. George, how are you?
Alex, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me here today.
I'm very excited to talk about this. I think it's so cool that, they're getting involved in this 3-on-3 league. How did the idea for the Str33t 3-on-3 league come together, and why did Big Ticket Sports decide to get involved?
Yeah, so, going back 2019, Kevin Garnett, we just formed this company, and we acquired Hoop It Up, which is the iconic 3x3 basketball platform. And at the time when we acquired it, Hoop It Up has a great tradition going back to 1989, and we just thought it was a great basketball property. Looking at the 3x3 space and understanding that 3x3 basketball is going into the Olympics, we just felt like it was a great platform. But at the time, we had visions of eventually creating an aspirational pro league. Given the fact that 3x3 was going into the Olympics, given the fact that we could see that gambling was proliferating through the states, that become starting to become legalized in 2018, we thought 3x3 could potentially be a great bettable platform. And it was always something on our radar. Obviously, COVID came and set us back a couple of years, but this was always something we were thinking about as we were continuing to grow and kind of relaunch Hoop It Up post-COVID. We created a Hoop It Up Pro-Am League, which was kind of the forerunner to Str33t, in that we have teams that play in our tournaments, and the winners come together for a national championship, and it's sanctioned by FIBA. So we've really leaned into the whole Olympic movement, and we really believe in 3x3 basketball. The games are quick, they're fast, they're action packed, and it's a great basketball product.
It definitely seems like 3-on-3 basketball is getting more and more popular. You mentioned it being added to the Olympics. How much potential do you think there is in 3-on-3 basketball as a sport going forward?
Yeah, obviously, we're creating Str33t, so we obviously are very bullish on it. I think the things about 3x3 basketball, which I think give it huge potential, are the fact that the games are 10-minute games, or first team of 21. So the games only take like 15 minutes in real time. And a team could play multiple games in the same day. So you can literally schedule a game every 20 minutes, not with the same teams, of course, but on the same court. And that gives us the opportunity to just have fast, streamable, bettable content, one game after another. And I think it's just tailor-made for, the next generation of sports viewers, and particularly basketball viewers. Look, I love watching the NBA. I love watching college basketball. But, younger audiences, a lot of people are cutting cable. There's just consuming games and sports on your phone and your mobile devices is just becoming more prevalent. This is maybe one of the only few sporting events that you could seriously watch the whole event on your phone. It's only 10, 15 minutes. I know you theoretically can watch a whole NFL game or an NBA game on your phone, but the reality is most people don't do that. This is something you can actually watch on your phone for 15 minutes, the entire game, from a practical standpoint. So I think that we're very bullish on it for those reasons.
Yeah, I talked to the creator of Slam Ball and how they brought that back, and he kind of made the same point that attention spans are smaller and shorter than ever. So, people are basically watching highlights. So any sport where you can have the games be quick and, easily digested, I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think it resonates a lot with today's younger fans. How will Str33t be different from some of the existing 3-on-3 leagues?
Well, I mean, the question we get asked the most is about the big three, that primarily. And look, we love the big three. We think, it's great, but it's a much different game. The big three are hour-long games. The talent pool is essentially former NBA players for the most part. And, it's a great platform. But what we're doing is something significantly different. As I said, we're playing the Olympic rules, the FIBA rules every 10 minutes. So the games are quick, they're fast. And the players are really players who play their way up from the street. Guys who are dedicated to playing 3x3 basketball. Not necessarily, we will get, and we add even and hoop it up, our Pro-Am events, an occasional former G League player, or an NBA, even a former NBA player has opted into some of our events. But it's not like we're targeting former NBA players like the big three. We're just simply getting the guys who are dedicated to playing 3x3 basketball. The guys who are going to play street and who've been playing hoop it up are dedicated. They play 3x3, wherever they can get a tournament, an event going, they travel to them. And there's a whole talented guys that are just, already organically have developed. In addition to that, I think once we went street, people know that there is this kind of platform. We think we'll be getting more players involved. Plus, I think different than anything else, we're also going to have women as well. But it's, I don't think anyone else has kind of done on at least on that kind of level. There is some women 3x3. I know there's the Force organization based with the Seattle Storm do a great job with it. But we're just going to create another platform for women. And also, we're planning to have co-ed competition, which is something that's unique. And so we're going to have men, we're going to have women, we're going to have co-ed. So it's just completely different from anything anyone else has done.
How much of an advantage is it having Kevin Garnett involved as well? I mean, players obviously respect him. He's a legend. Being able to have him involved. And then also just with all your ventures, since, again, for people that don't know, you're the CEO of Big Ticket Sports. How much of an advantage is it just having KG involved in all these projects and ventures?
Well, Kevin is really the soul of all of this. Everyone knows him as a player on the court, and you've seen him interviews. And obviously, he is what you see. He's passionate. He's passionate about basketball. He believes in this. He believes in the whole. Really, he was really the mind behind a lot of the design of this. And as far as the DNA of the street ball aspect of how we're rolling this brand out, that's something that really resonates with him. Someone, played in the playgrounds, played in the streets, and along with himself and a lot of his contemporaries played in the NBA. It's really like the DNA of the NBA, where guys come from. So, yes, it's 303 basketball, but there's a whole culture behind this street series we're doing that we're, hoping to really cast a light on. Having Kevin, KG as the face of it, the ambassador of it, obviously gives us a huge advantage, in this sense as well, because he's, he can cast a spotlight on this and create some promotion for us that, George Daniel is always going to be able to do, obviously. So it's obviously, there are a lot on so many levels, but he's involved in all aspects of it. And he's just a great basketball and creative mind.
You were previously the commissioner of the National Lacrosse League. You have experience as an executive in Hoop It Up, minor league basketball back in the 90s. How did you get involved with Big Ticket Sports, and how did you meet KG? How do you get close with him?
Yeah, so when I left the National Lacrosse League, I started a small boutique law firm with some partners. And one of my retired partners had at one time been the counsel for the job counsel for the NBA Players Association. So KG came to us as a client, and that's how the relationship began. And so he's a client of our firm, of myself. And then, given my sports management background, we decided to form Big Ticket Sports. So it's really been a great opportunity for us. It's great working with him.
You mentioned that most people see Kevin as a player, but one of the things that we're seeing nowadays is that so many of these former NBA players, even some current NBA players, are launching their own companies and becoming big investors in a lot of different ventures. What are your thoughts on that? And because you have been around basketball since the 90s, how much of a shift is that from when you first, got involved in basketball to where things are at now, where guys are valuing equity and some of them are becoming moguls?
It's so true, and it's just such a different world. I mean, and as you said, I did start minor league basketball in the 90s. And the idea of there wasn't even an opportunity to audio stream games. This is before Mark Cuban had his audio network, So, you'd have to get somebody to like listen, dial a radio station and put you on hold to listen to a game that was far away. It was just, it's a different world. And so with that, you see all of the change in the last 25, 30 years, with a lot of streaming content. And that's been a big driver of it, being able to deliver that along with social media. There's just so many opportunities in the sports tech space that only, 30 years ago, we've heard about things that were coming, but to really now see them. And I think the players that you mentioned, are, they're keenly aware of that. I think they're today's generation of players, certainly the active players are, you have good and strong advisors, and they're keenly aware. They have their, the fingers on the pulse of all these deals and the deal flow that's coming in. And I think they're to be, commended, and for what they're developing and what they're building for their post career.
What advice would you give to someone that wants to become a sports executive or work in sports?
Yeah, look, everybody takes a different path, right? I mean, my path was significantly different than most. I was a practicing attorney, and I decided to get involved in minor league basketball. Really, I was involved in sports 7 years, where I was actually paying my way, by investing in ventures. And it wasn't until I was working full time at the National Lacrosse League as general counsel and deputy commissioner, I was actually getting a salary. So it's a little unique situation. Everybody's different. But I will, look, I think the always one way in, I think it's always been through sales is always the big thing, right? If you're a star in sales, if you can, make the cash register ring, so to speak, there's always a spot for you in sports. That's not the only job. Obviously, there are a lot of other opportunities. Obviously, my legal background helped me advance in. So there's a lot of different ways, in the door. But I would urge anyone, any person coming out and wants to get into the industry, really there's lots more opportunity than there was then. There's so many franchises, so many teams. And I think, trying to land a job, even if it's part-time, to get experience is the main thing. I think that's the main thing, to get yourself some experience and start building that resume.
What are some other projects that Big Ticket Sports is working on currently?
Yes, well, one of our main property that we have, along with Hoop It Up and involved in Street, is Ticket Soccer, which is a 3v3, like Hoop It Up. It's a 3v3 platform for young soccer players. So that's our main properties, and we're continuing to look at other opportunities in sports realm to see what other things that we may be developing in the near future.
And then what are some of the biggest challenges, or what is it like, I guess, launching a 3-on-3 basketball league? I mean, I know you guys are putting in the work right now to kind of get it off the ground, but what kind of goes into that, and what does that really entail?
Yeah, look, there's a lot there. I mean, logistics, scheduling, player contracts, player procurement, scouting. There are so many aspects of it. As you said, I do have some experience, years ago in minor league basketball. There are some things I can draw from that, but it's also a different world. We're in the age of the digital age. So there's the content side of it. I mean, if you're talking about something 25, 30 years ago, it's strictly ticket sales and whatever sponsors you can get. Yeah, those things can still be very important, obviously. But there's also opportunity here when we're talking about sponsorships and data and content. It becomes a different world. And so there's so many things that, right now we're working with. And PLN, who are our partners in this, are have been great. They, as I said, we set forth 4 years ago to try to create a pro 3x3 league. And it wasn't until we connected with PLN that we felt we had the right partner in it. Their experience in their brief time with operations, distributions, and most notably in the data and incredible sports market was just a great fit for us. And that's why we decided to work with PLN and watching this venture.
As I mentioned, you were the commissioner of the National Lacrosse League, and you really helped the league kind of go to the next level. What are your thoughts on just where lacrosse is at today? It feels like it's so much more popular and mainstream than it was, I'm sure, years ago when you were starting out in that league.
Yeah, so when I started in the league, it was the fall of 2000, and the National Lacrosse League, which is, for viewers who may get them confused, it's the indoor league. And we started the league had been around since the mid-90s, but it was Northeastern. A lot of the franchises were in New York State. There was a team in Toronto and Philadelphia, and that was pretty much it. So one of the things that we felt was necessary, what we came in, was to try to get it across the country. So we first, during our second year, we expanded to Western Canada with teams in Calgary and Vancouver. Our third year, we were able to place a franchise with Crocky Sports, in Denver, which obviously owned the Denver Nuggets, Colorado Avalanche. And that team became a hit and was drawing 14,000, 15,000 fans a game that was known as the Pepsi Center. And so that was really one of the big models that we followed, was trying to partner with NHL teams when we could. The league today, I think, has 6 partnerships with NHL teams, I believe, with the Vancouver Canucks, Calgary Flames, Buffalo Sabres, aforementioned Avalanche, Philadelphia Flyers. So, it really works well with hockey. You can play a hockey game in the morning and then a lacrosse game, or in the afternoon, and then play a lacrosse game in the evening. So, it's the sport overall. It continues to grow. I think it's amazing to watch it grow from the last 20 years. And now, like 3x3 basketball, it will at least be in the LA Olympics, in 2028, I believe. And so that was announced this week. So I'm happy about that. I've got a lot of friends that are still in lacrosse, and really pleased to see the sport advance. It's got a great heritage with its origins from Native American community. It's got a great story that I think a lot of people don't know. And I would urge any of your listeners to, look into that if you don't know about the origins of the sport. It's a 700-year-old sport with a beautiful story to tell.
Absolutely. Is there anything else about the Street 3-on-3 basketball league that we haven't covered, or that, you want to add?
Yeah, no, I just think, we're really excited about the opportunity. We think this, I think our long-term goal is that we'd love to see Street, grow and build it. We'll start with the first series, but we'd love to see it grow and really have Street, where you can always turn the TV on, there's a Street game going on. I think, 5-10 years from now, that would be our ultimate goal. So, we just think there's enormous opportunity here, and we're really looking forward to the launch.
So for fans that are excited about this new league, its first games are starting in early 2024, correct?
The plan is to launch early 2024. I think we're targeting February. Okay. So that's the goal at this point. And the plan is that there'll be series of 3 to 4 weeks in a single location, and then we would move them around like most likely. So the first one we're targeting probably in the Northeast United States sometime in early 2024. It should be an announcement coming out in the next month or so.
I love it. Well, everyone, make sure you guys check out Street Basketball, the new 3-on-3 league that Big Ticket Sports and Kevin Garnett are co-launching with Crow League Network. Very exciting stuff. And George, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Alex, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate the time. Appreciate your interest.
I want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Prize Picks. Now, if you haven't played Prize Picks, you are missing out. It's a daily fantasy sports app where you pick 2 to 6 players and pick whether they'll score more or less points than their Prize Pick projection. If you're right, you win big. You can win 25 times your money on any entry. At Prize Picks, you are competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections. Prize Picks offers projections on virtually every sport: NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, PGA, college football, college basketball, soccer, WNBA, esports, NASCAR, tennis, MMA, boxing, disc golf, overseas basketball, cricket, and more. You can mix and match players from different sports, so you could have LeBron James and Patrick Mahomes in the same entry, for example. If you download Prize Picks today and use the promo code RUNNING, they'll double your deposit up to $100. That's the promo code RUNNING, and they'll double your deposit up to $100. It takes 30 seconds or less to build a lineup. To show you how easy it is, I'm going to build a lineup right now. All right, so you go over to Prize Picks, and right now they're doing a special where if Steph Curry has 1 point in the Warriors' first game against the Suns, then you win. So we're going to say more than 0.5 points for Steph Curry. And then let's go over to the NFL. I like doing the receiving yards. That's been working for me lately. So we're going to go more than 81.5 receiving yards for AJ Brown. We're going to do a $20 entry. And just like that, we are good to go. We are entered for this weekend. Thank you to Prize Picks for sponsoring this episode. If you guys want to try it out, make sure to use that promo code RUNNING, and they'll double your first deposit up to $100. That's the promo code RUNNING. Let's get back to the show. Thank you to George Daniel for joining us. Now I am joined by a fantasy basketball expert. He is Noah Rubin of Rotoworld. He's also the host of the Tank Me Later podcast. Noah, thanks for joining me. How are you?
I'm doing well, Alex. Excited to be here. Fantasy season, well, NBA season as well, is a week away. It's the best time of the year. We're excited for it.
Absolutely. So there's a ton to talk about from an NBA standpoint, a fantasy standpoint. I actually have some drafts coming up, one on October 22nd. So I'm excited to pick your brain and, steal all your little tips here. Starting out, who are some players that you're higher on than maybe the rest of the experts in the field? Are there certain guys that you're kind of planting your flag on that you're higher on?
Yeah, we're looking at guys that are going earlier that I think I'm a little bit high on. Trae Young is definitely one of them. He kind of slipped a little bit last season, had some issues with his field goal percentage. Turnovers are obviously going to be there. But I think with Quinn Snyder there, kind of rejuvenating the offense is pretty much the polar opposite of what Nate McMillan was running in Atlanta there. So I think Trae Young's going to be able to have not only just a better overall season, but definitely going to shoot some more threes. He's going kind of middle of the second round in Yahoo leagues, most leagues. I'd probably have him as like a late first rounder, maybe first pick of the second round. So just a tad higher on him there. Another guy I really like that's kind of going later is Andrew Wiggins. His Yahoo ADP is kind of in the 90s, but I have no problem taking him in the 70s even. He was incredible to start last season. First month of the season, he was a top 25 player in fantasy basketball. And then he missed a large stretch of games because of an injury turned into an illness. And then he played a little bit, wasn't the same, and then missed the last 2 months of the regular season due to personal issues. Wasn't quite the same in the playoffs, but I'm expecting him to get back to what he was at the beginning of last season, heading into this year. So that's two guys that I'm pretty much coming away with in every single draft.
And who are some guys that you're lower on at their cost? Maybe guys that you're avoiding?
Obviously, a lot of the injury-prone guys, quote-unquote injury-prone guys, nobody can actually predict these injuries, but a guy like Kevin Durant going in the first round, or if Anthony Davis, don't really want to spend my first round pick on a guy that might play 50 games. I want a guy that's going to play closer to 70. Second round, no problem getting them, but probably even as good as they are when they're on the court, not really looking to spend my first pick on them. Another guy is Chris Paul. I think it seems like he's going to be able to adjust his game a little bit to fit with Golden State. A lot of guys there, good coaching staff. So not surprised if they make it work out, but I think he's got to sacrifice a lot for it to work. So I'm not sure how well it works for fantasy. And then the Austin Reeves hype train, it's just a little bit too high for me. Everybody seems to be all in on him. I think he's a very good player. He's going to have a really good season, but for fantasy basketball, he's not really doing much defensively. He was already incredibly efficient for a younger guard. I don't see the numbers jumping up enough to grab him where I've seen him going around 75 range at times, sometimes in the 80s. I think he's more of a late 90s kind of guy in my book.
Yeah, it feels like a lot of people are predicting an Austin Reeves breakout. Who are some guys that are younger that you could see breaking out? And maybe, this time next year, we're talking about them as being some of the biggest surprises of the season. Are there any guys that you can kind of project to break out?
Off the top of my head, the first one that comes to mind is a guy like Jalen Johnson, who it seems like we've seen him get a few starts during the preseason. And he's going to play a larger role in Atlanta after being in the G League during his rookie season and a kind of a smaller role off the bench last year. It seems like he's going to be fighting for the starting job. I don't imagine that he will start this season, at least to start the year. I think that'll be DeAndre Hunter and Sadiq Bey in the front court. But I think by this time next year, he's going to be a starter. They like that he's a playmaking four that's incredibly athletic. He's shown the ability to knock down shots from deep. He's kind of everything that they wanted John Collins to be, but also he can dribble and play make a little bit. So I think he fits really well alongside Trae Young and DeJounte Murray. And he has a fantasy friendly game because he can get defensive stats. He's going to shoot a pretty high percentage for a guy that's also has the ball in his hands. So I think he's the main guy that I can really think of that I think is going to be much better coming into next season.
You mentioned preseason action. How much are you evaluating preseason and taking stock in what you're seeing? And how much are you just kind of sticking to your opinions? I guess watching some of these preseason games, there's guys putting up crazy numbers. How much do you let that sway your opinions, or have you tried not to let it influence your rankings too much?
I think I don't let it impact. It's kind of a case-by-case basis for me. Obviously, there's going to be guys that have massive games, specifically young guys that have massive games while they're kind of managing the minutes of some of their more experienced players. We've seen Peyton Pritchard have some really good games for Boston, but we know he's not going to be a major part of their rotation this season. So a guy like that, it's nice to see it from a dynasty perspective because maybe one day he can be able to produce, maybe not to that level, but provide some solid production, especially in deeper leagues. But I think it's important to see how coaches use players. I keep going back to Atlanta, but it's easy for me because I'm watching all the games. But a guy like Jalen Johnson saying, okay, like they're comfortable putting him in the starting unit. Okay, Quinn Snyder wants Onyeka Okongwu shooting some outside shots. They like those guys long term. So I think it's more important from a dynasty perspective, kind of seeing how coaches like players and seeing things that they want to see them try and seeing just how rookies adjust to the game. We've seen Brandon Miller play much better than he did during Summer League, which is encouraging for him. I think he's a great guy to take a shot on in the last couple rounds that can end up providing some really good value, probably more later in the season. But as far as, random 7 or 8 year veterans that are breaking out and having big games, not really putting too much stock in that because, it's got to change come opening night.
I'm curious, we've seen fantasy football as, blown up and obviously a ton of people play it. You with like DFS, Prize Picks, you see tons of talk about football. Fantasy basketball has always had a harder time kind of winning fans over just because you have to check it daily. I think with Prize Picks we've seen in some daily fantasy, there's more interest in it. But as far as like a season-long fantasy basketball league, that really hasn't taken off in popularity. Do you think there's anything? I know Sleepers tried a few things like you pick one game per week and you can lock that game in, and that's how you can kind of allow fans to not have to check every single day and set their lineup every single day. Or they, there's a lot of different things people have tried. But what do you think fantasy basketball can do to kind of challenge fantasy football or become more popular? I'm not sure if it'll ever be as popular as fantasy football because all the games are condensed into tiny part of the week, and football's so popular. But is there anything that fantasy basketball can do on that front to kind of get more popular or more mainstream?
Yeah, I think that there's things that can be done. I think a lot of it is, if you go into a random business, no matter where they are, a lot of the staff are just going to say, hey, do you guys want to do a fantasy football league this year? But you don't really hear about people doing, my work fantasy basketball league. So I think that's part of the reason fantasy football is more popular, especially also just you can see ratings with the NFL versus the NBA. But I think, it's funny. The reason that you mentioned is that people say, I don't want to have to check my lineup every day. But we know fantasy football people are also checking their lineup every day. I check mine every single day for fantasy football as well. So it's like I'm consistently looking to see who's available, what moves have been made, keeping up with news updates. So I think that's, I don't think it takes but 10 minutes if you're doing a couple fantasy basketball leagues to set your lineup every single day. But I think it's just a more complex game to play. I mean, fantasy football, you're looking at points, and there is points leagues in fantasy basketball, but I think category leagues is kind of where you're really looking at where the hardcore players are playing. It's, and then you're accounting for a lot more strategy involved there. So I think it's more complex, which might also scare people away. But one thing that I found that's made it easier for me, and I think also just people that may not be wanting to set a lineup every day, like you said, is you can make it weekly lineups in the NBA. You have to account for, this player's playing 4 games versus this player's playing 3 games. And sometimes that ends up, influencing your decision, but it makes it so you don't have to check it every single day if you don't want to. Now you're going to end up checking it every single day, but I have that set for a few of my leagues so that it's not something that, if I have a busy day, I'm stressing about, I didn't set my lineup for whatever league. So I think that's something that makes it a little bit easier, but Really, I think it boils down to more that not as many people know about how fun it could be in fantasy basketball just because not as many people do it. I was actually talking with Robin Marks, who runs a fantasy basketball podcast for Believe in Sports, about, and this is me kind of sharing my idea. So hopefully either somebody takes it and runs with it, because that'd be cool. But is if you play NBA 2K and you see like the social media page on your league or your My Career, it has different reporters or analysts talking about games from last night. And I think it'd be really cool to get some fantasy basketball analysts. I'm not just trying to get my name in 2K. Like if it's other people, like cool. Like I'm more for this happening. And then you're playing in your My League on 2K or your My Career. And, Josh Lloyd said, wow, like this player had this many points, rebounds, assists, steals, blocks, definitely going to add him on the waiver wire next week. And it just has that there. It's like, oh, okay. Like fantasy basketball's in my mind. I think that just helps. It's more of about reaching different people. I personally, what Sleeper does with the game pick, I don't love, because then I have to make a decision on, is this player going to actually do better in this game versus like, is the matchup? I don't know. Not something that I personally love, but I think weekly lineups and just exposure are two things that could really help.
No, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. I'm curious, when you're trying to approach a draft that's a 9-category league versus a draft in a points league, what are some of the biggest differences as far as your draft strategy, and maybe tips for viewers that either have both kinds of leagues or they're only in one and they're trying to figure out how to parse their rankings and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So obviously, standard 9 category is points, rebounds, assists, steals, blocks, turnovers, field goal percentage, threes made, free throw percentage. I think that's the 9. And then points leagues, it could be anything. I think the pretty standard is 1 point for points, 1.2 for rebounds, 1.5 for assists, 3 for steals, 3 for blocks, -1 for turnovers. So it's just really looking at the difference. That's the standard. But I know, like if you go on an ESPN points leagues, they give you -1 for a field goal attempt and +1 for a field goal made. So it ends up being kind of weird and hard to keep track of. Just looking at those standard ones, when you're playing in a points league, you don't have to worry about percentages. So a guy like a Russell Westbrook that's going to have a low field goal percentage, and it's a little bit better with the Clippers, a low free throw percentage, but it's going to get you a decent amount of points, rebounds, and assists. He's got a lot more value in points leagues than he does in category leagues. John Morant kind of fits that same structure of a guy that is going to be better in points leagues than category leagues. So they end up going a little bit higher. Guys like RJ Barrett, Kelton Johnson, that don't really give you any other stats other than points, are able to be, probably top 100 or borderline top 100 guys in points leagues, whereas category leagues, you might take them in the last 2 rounds. With category leagues, like I mentioned earlier, a lot more strategy goes into it, because you can choose to punt categories and say, I'm just not going to worry about field goal percentage and turnovers. That's one of my favorite things to do, is say, I don't care about field goal percentage, don't care about turnovers. I'm going to try and win the 7 other categories. And I'm going to start my draft with LaMelo Ball and Trae Young. That's my favorite thing to do this year, because they're going to take my field goal percentage. They're going to take my turnovers, but they're going to give me a ton of points, ton of assists, ton of threes. So just going in with certain strategies like that and kind of deciding based on probably who you get in the first couple rounds, how the rest of your draft is going to look. It's an important thing to consider, because if you start your draft with Giannis and say, okay, I'm going to punt free throws, not worry about them, punt threes, not worry about them, I can go Domantas Sabonis the next round. He's going to give me like, let me see. I could probably actually tell you exactly how many threes he hit per game last year. 0.4. So not much. Free throw percentage isn't great. And then you go Zion round 5, that maximizes his value as well. So it can end up changing the value of the players a lot by each manager, which makes it pretty interesting, because a guy like Zion's going in around pick 60, but if you're pairing him with Giannis and Sabonis and he stays on the court, it's a pretty hard team to beat, because you're going to dominate about 5 categories. So a lot more strategy goes into your 9 category leagues as opposed to your points leagues, because then it's like, I don't care if it's points, rebounds, assists, or what. Points are points. I love Julius Randle. I love Pascal Siakam, guys like that are going to be dominant in points leagues. They're still good in category leagues, but they don't quite reach that same level of production.
For sure. One thing that I did last year was I joined my first dynasty basketball league, and that's been so much fun being able to add different rookies. And, I just love the strategy in that too. I basically went and loaded up with a super young team, but other people added a bunch of veterans and they're in win now mode and have, a 1 or 2 year championship window. So I love Dynasty. I would recommend it to anyone that's a big diehard basketball fan. I think it's so much fun, and it makes it more fun when you're watching the draft and actually scouting these rookies to draft to your team each year. I think it's a ton of fun. So what advice would you have for someone that's maybe entering a Dynasty league and has a startup draft? Do you typically go for young, high upside guys? Are you more of a win now approach? Like, what's your Dynasty strategy usually?
That probably depends on who I'm playing with. If I'm playing with friends that I know are going to be committed and I'm saying, okay, guys, we're going to do this for the next 40 years or whatever. Obviously, we haven't gotten to that point, so I have no idea if it's actually going to last that long, but it's been lasting a few years. So it's like, okay, I'm cool to start young, rebuild, tank, because I know it's at least going to go 5 years and be able to see this rebuild through. I personally have a lot of fun tanking within the rules because it depends on your league, how much they allow. And just starting young, watching a second round pick that I made crack a rotation and say, wow, they have some upside. I personally enjoy that. But I think if I'm going into a league with people I don't necessarily know, I'm probably going to go more win now. But it really depends on what pick I get. If I have the number 1 pick, I'm probably going to go Jokic, go more win now. If I have pick 3, I'm probably going to end up with Victor Wembanyama. Might do a little bit of a rebuild because of how young he is. So I kind of see who's the best player available in the first round and let that dictate how I go with the rest of my draft. But it's also possible to go kind of young and still compete early on because some guys that are older might not be drafted very high. I think, a guy like LeBron is going to go significantly later in dynasty leagues than he will in redraft. So you can still go young the first couple rounds and then get guys that are still producing that are just older in the later rounds because you're going probably about 300 players deep in a dynasty draft. So there's plenty of times to get older guys that can still produce later on and just have fun with it. I think you can kind of do both.
Yeah, some of the most fun years I've had in fantasy football and fantasy basketball and dynasty leagues are the years where you are tanking or rebuilding and you're selling off your veterans for future picks. You're developing young guys. It can be a ton of fun whenever, you basically have a whole rebuild that you're working on. That's one of the cool things about dynasty too. Even if your team sucks, there are still fun things that you can do as the season winds down because you're focused on the future and try to stockpile. You basically get your Sam Presti on, trying to stockpile young players and picks. So I've loved Dynasty. I want your thoughts on this year's rookie class because, you look at, obviously all the talk is about Victor Wembanyama, Scoot Henderson, looks fantastic and could be very special player. The Thompson twins, Brandon Miller, and even the depth too. You start looking at some of the players, in the teens. There are some, really talented guys. What are your thoughts on this class as a whole? And then, from a dynasty perspective, or even from a redraft perspective, I've noticed that in redraft, rookies tend to fall later because, people aren't sure what to expect from them or they really haven't done their homework as much on the rookies. What are your thoughts on the class as a whole?
Yeah, it's a generational class. It's going to be a fun one that's really good for a really long time. A lot of the guys that I liked didn't land in the best spots, so they might not produce a ton this year. I'm not really targeting them in redraft, such as a guy like Cason Wallace. Not really looking for him, even though I really liked him coming into this year's draft. But I don't think he's going to get a ton of opportunities with the Thunder as a rookie. But you look at Wemby, generational guy, a guy you're probably going to have to take in the second or third round in redraft. Scoot Henderson, you can probably get around pick 100. Same thing with the Sar Thompson. It seems like Bilal Coulibaly is going to start as well in Washington based on the preseason. We'll see if things change, but I think he provides them with a lot of defensive production. So him and Derek Lively are 2 other rookies that it looks like they can start. A lot of these rookies are going to come off the bench, but it seems like we have 5 or 6 that are going to get a chance to start when you look at the top 3 picks, Asar Thompson, Lively, and Coulibaly. But then Amen Thompson looks phenomenal, a guy that they're going to struggle to not start. It's going to be a tough decision in Houston. They have a lot of depth, a lot of talent there. So a guy like Anthony Black's going to be probably stuck on Orlando's bench this year, but he has so much upside to provide steals. Jarris Walker's probably going to come off the bench, but who knows? He could take over for Obi Toppin. So there's a lot of guys I like for fantasy. Keontae George could end up playing a good bit for Utah this season just because they don't have a point guard and are probably going to experiment with a lot of different things. It's a really good class. It's a very deep class. We've even seen Julian Strawther, who went with pick 29. I think he's had at least 20 points in every preseason game, or maybe he had less than 20 in one game, but he's been phenomenal for Denver. So really good class from top to bottom. I think a lot of these guys are going to end up seeing minutes this year, even if only a handful of them actually start.
Yeah, it's a very fun class. I'm excited to see how these guys develop and whether this class can become one of the best draft classes of all time, that years from now we're looking back and putting it up there with, 2003, 1996, and some of the other top ones. Noah, thank you so much for joining me. Where can people find your work?
Yeah, Alex, thanks for having me. I, like you said, beginning working for Rotoworld, all the blurbs there, that's us. But then also the columns, our draft guide, all on NBCsports.com/Rotoworld. I've also, you mentioned the Tank Me Later podcast, which is part of Fantasy Basketball International. So I've been doing that about once a week, mostly dynasty stuff, but focusing a little bit more on redraft now because it's start of the season. And then I just started contributing to Sportstopia as well, which is a kind of a startup fantasy site. I think the plan is for me to do a dynasty column there once a week. So if you're looking for a dynasty itch, I got plenty of content coming your way all season.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining me. And if you guys want to watch more episodes of Running Up the Score, be sure to subscribe, follow us wherever you're watching this. We drop new episodes every Tuesday and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern time. We have some big guests coming up soon. Paolo Banchero is going to be coming on and some others. So definitely check that out. Make sure you're subscribed. And until next time, thanks for watching.